Hello and welcome to another episode of ICU Doc Talk. It's been a bit since I've done an episode. I've been busy and did a little vacation, so just took me a bit to get back, but here I am. And I think today I'm going to tell stories, just kind of some random stories that I've remembered from over the last several years. Whenever I share stories, they're always, for one thing, they're never recent. And they're random. They're anonymized by time, and they're anonymized by sometimes by gender, sometimes by other details, so that I tell these stories in such a way that even if the patient in question were to listen to it, they would question if they would probably be like, I don't know who this is. Maybe it could have been me. It could be somebody else. And obviously I do that so that I don't have any HIPAA violations in the United States. That's when you can't share patient-sensitive information. The stories I share are anonymized in such a way, in several ways, and I obviously don't share any details, and it's totally fine to do that. So let me just get into it. The first story I want to share today is about well, I'll just start from the top. So I do ECMO, right? If you listen to my podcast, you know that I usually talk about that quite a bit. ECMO is a heart-lung bypass machine that we place patients on for several reasons. It's usually it's extreme mechanical support to your body to help someone survive. It's very, very invasive, and it's one of the last lines of therapy that we have in modern medicine to help keep someone alive. It's like maximum medical life support. We put in these tubes into your catheters, very large catheters into your veins and arteries, and it continuously draws blood out of your body through these tubes. It pumps it into a machine. That machine adds oxygen to the blood. It takes out carbon dioxide, which is what your lungs do, and then it pumps it back into your body. Which is what the heart does. It pumps, right? So it replaces both the function of the heart and the lungs. ECMO, it stands for extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. Extracorporeal means outside the body. Membrane oxygenation means it gets oxygenated over this membrane. Now it can be used just for lung failure, like with COVID patients. It can be used for heart failure, like someone who's in cardiac arrest or someone who's going into heart failure. Okay, so that's a big part of my practice. When I'm in the ICU, I do ECMO, and I also treat cardiovascular, cardiac surgical patients as well. As I said, there's many patients to put on ECMO. So I got a consult. So I get consulted. When I'm the ECMO attending. When I'm in the ICU and I'm, in that spot, I get consults from all over the hospital, but also outside the hospital as well. They're like, hey, should we put this patient on ECMO? And people call, and I love, it's good getting these calls, and sometimes they're often not candidates. And I've had other episodes where I share if they're candidacy and all that stuff, so I won't go too deep into that. Anyway, I got a call about a young woman in the cardiac ICU, which is the cardiac ICU is like cardiologists run that. I work in the cardiosurgical ICU or the cardiovascular ICU or the cardiothoracic ICU, CT ICU, CV ICU. It's called different things in different places, but I work in surgical patients, right? So I got a call from the cardiac ICU, and often, right? They call all the time for like, hey, should we put this patient on ECMO? Because they have heart failure patients all the time. They have very, very sick patients whose hearts don't work. That's why they're there in that unit. They're getting critical care, and they often need help. So I got a call. So this was a young woman, and not a child, but a young adult. And they're like, hey, can you come take a look at this patient? So, and I went with another colleague of mine as well. That's another thing in the practice that I am in. When we determine someone is going to be put on ECMO or not, we always make the decision with another ECMO practitioner, another ECMO attending, so the decision making is shared. Because it's a big decision to make, because sometimes we're just consigning someone to die when we don't put them on ECMO. So we share that decision, make sure it's the appropriate decision. So we saw this patient, and she was in right heart failure. She had basically idiopathic, meaning we don't know. That's what idiopathic means. Right heart failure and pulmonary hypertension. Young woman. And she was on just massive amounts of inotropic support, meaning medications that help our heart pump. Very, very high doses. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, dobutamine, and very high doses, extremely high doses. And she was awake. She was not intubated. She did not have a breathing tube. She was not on a ventilator. She had a very, very high lactate. I mean, well, not very, very high, but high. Like, I don't know, it was like 10 or 12 or something, which is high, right? Lactate, I've explained in other videos or whatever, podcasts and videos. Lactate is when you have a lactate, high lactate, that's a sign of anaerobic metabolism in your body. What that means is your heart or your body, for whatever reason, is not delivering oxygenated blood to your tissue beds, right? So if you think about your arteries, they're like highways. They're highways of blood. Your big arteries, like your aorta or your radial artery, these are enormous arteries. They're not delivering blood to the immediate area. They're pumping blood way, way downstream as the arteries thin into arterioles. And then as those arterioles turn into capillaries, which are tiny, right? Capillaries are have the width of a single red blood cell. That's how small capillaries are. And that's where gas exchange occurs. That's where the delivery of oxygen to cells occurs, way down the line, right? So even though blood is flowing through your major arteries, that doesn't mean you're oxygenating your your capillary beds way far out at the end of the line. Does that make sense? So when someone's lactate is high, it's a sign that they're not delivering oxygenated blood, that they've gone into anaerobic metabolism. Now, there's several reasons you can go into anaerobic metabolism. One is you're in septic shock. When you're in septic shock, you're in vasodilatory shock, meaning your vessels are dilated out, because that's when you have an inflammatory response, you dilate your vessels out. Your SVR, your systemic vascular resistance, goes up. It's too high. The resistance of the system gets too high, and we call it capillary leak, or at the capillary bed, you start bypassing those capillary beds, the blood, and you don't deliver your oxygen, and your lactate goes up. Your cells start using lactate to power their cells with glycolysis. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's not that big of a deal. What happens is your cells start making more lactate because they can't use oxygen in the mitochondria to create ATP for energy for the cells. So they start using more lactate. That lactate gets shunted back to the liver in a process called the Cori cycle. It creates more glucose, and then that glucose is used in the cells through glycolysis to create a little bit more ATP. It's an inefficient way of creating energy for the cell. It's like a backup system for your cells when you're in a low system state where you can't get oxygen. All right, so when your lactate is high, it's a sign that things are going wrong. Like, that's never a good thing. Something is wrong if someone's lactate is high. Now, everybody has a little amount of lactate, like 0.5 or 1. That's normal. There's a little bit of anaerobic metabolism going on in your body at all times. But if you got a lactate of 10 or 12 or 20, 20 is terrible, right? 20 is like you're almost dead sometimes. And the trend matters too. If someone's starting to trend up, something's wrong, something needs to be done. So this patient, we know they have crazy right side pulmonary pressure. She had unbelievable right side pulmonary pressures, very, very high. We call them, they were suprasystemic, meaning the right side of your heart is a low pressure system. Okay, it's the right side. You have two sides of your heart, the right side and the left side. The right side of your heart is a low pressure system. You usually have millimems, in measures of millimeters of mercury. Your pulmonary pressure should be like 20 over 10, something like that, right? 25 over 15, systolic over diastolic, 25 over 15. Where you compare that to the left side of your heart, think of a normal blood pressure. That's usually like 120 over 80, right? Much higher pressures, because you have the left side of your heart provides pressures to your entire body. The right side of your heart just needs to provide pressure to go to the pulmonary vasculature to pump the blood through to get oxygenated, if that makes any sense. So this patient's pulmonary pressures were suprasystemic, meaning they were above the systemic blood pressure of the left side of the heart. So meaning she had like pulmonary pressures of like 90 over 40 or 90 over 50 or something like that. That's bad, right? If you have pulmonary pressures higher than your left side pressures, you're not flowing blood through your heart, basically. I mean, it can get very... obviously you are, or she'd be dead. There's something going on. But that person is at very high risk of going into cardiac arrest any moment and dying. So that's the situation with this patient. Okay, so it was like, okay, should we put this patient on ECMO? Okay, right heart failure. And so this is a great candidate. It's a young woman. It's a young person. And this is a good candidate for, and maybe this patient will be a candidate for like a heart transplant. Or maybe they just need, so when you're going to put someone on ECMO, you have to always think, what is the end game? It's a bridge, right? That's the classic language you use. It's a bridge to what? So you can't just put someone on ECMO indefinitely. You cannot do that. You have to have a plan. Why? Are they a good candidate? Are they in multi-organ failure? This patient was in single organ failure. Her kidney still worked. All of her organs still worked except her heart. And she was young. So it's like, this is a very good candidate to get a heart transplant if she needs it, if she doesn't recover from that. So what is the bridge to ECMO? Why? You can't have a bridge to nowhere. So this would either be, for this patient, it would be like, oh, this is a bridge to recovery. So maybe we can turn her around, get her right side pressures down. Or it would be a bridge to heart transplant. Now, this would not be a bridge to an LVAD, just so we're clear, right? I know that's obvious to people that know what I'm talking about, but an LVAD is if you've heard of it, that's a permanent pump that's placed inside your heart, inside your chest, that people can leave the hospital and walk around with to help. That only helps the left side of their heart. And for an LVAD, the right side of your heart has to work. If you have so obviously this patient's not a candidate for something like an LVAD because, or an RVAD. We don't put in isolated RVADs, permanent isolated RVADs. So not a candidate for that, but it's like, oh yeah, this is a pretty good candidate. But then it was like, so discussions like this have to happen with lots of people, right? Everybody needs to be on board. Everybody's input, like the cardiology team, my team, and then, a surgeon, if there's a surgeon that's involved, everybody needs to talk and discuss to arrive to the right decisions. These take time. What I've learned from ECMO consults is no two are alike. It's tailor-made. You have to start from the ground up every single time you address a patient. Sometimes it's obvious when patients are not candidates. You're like, no, they're not a candidate. But there's no template. There's no template here. Particularly, this is a very non-evidence-based practice, right? ECMO in itself is a pretty low evidence-based practice for many reasons. So anyway, the discussion was, well, why don't we just provide right heart support for this patient rather than putting on VA ECMO, veno-arterial ECMO, where we put a tube on their venous side and then a tube on their arterial side. This patient only needed support with the right side of the heart. So someone, the cardiology team had a good idea to be like, why don't we put in a flexible right side impella? So an impella is a small little snake-like pump, okay, that is obviously invasive, but it's a big deal putting someone on an impella. I don't want to say it's not. It's usually an interventional cardiologist. Sometimes cardiac surgeons also will do this. They snake up they put a line up through your groin. Usually you can do it through your arm as well, and you snake it up into the heart. And it's just imagine a little snake that's laying over the chambers of the heart, and it's also a pump, and it just helps pump blood forward through the heart. So putting in a flexible RVAD or an impella on the right side of the heart to help assist the right side of the heart is a good idea. It's not as big as a commitment as ECMO. So we all decided, let's do it. That's a great idea. Let's go down. Let's go down to interventional cardiology. Now, this patient was at high risk of dying at any moment. So I went down with this patient to the cath lab, the interventional cardiology lab. It's an OR, where a cardiologist placed this RVAD, or impella, through the groin. Now, she was terrified the whole time. Also, complicating things, I'm going to get into more of the details. This patient did not speak English. They spoke another language. And she was alone. There was no family. Because she was from another country, and her family was in that country. So I guess I didn't know her social situation super well, but she lived here with friends and she worked and stuff. But she's from another country. She didn't speak English. Now that's to say we didn't have an interpreter. We had an interpreter and all that stuff. But it's still, it's not. It's a little. I just imagine her sitting on this operating table with a whole host of people. Being like, oh, let's do this, let's do that, and then getting this thing put in her. And this is actually not. It wasn't put in her groin. It was put in her right internal jugular, this impella. So it was placed, it was snaked down into her right. So, and just trying to keep her comfortable. I just can't imagine how far. I know she was terrified. I was with her and saw a look on her face. She was absolutely terrified. But we tried to keep her, and she couldn't get any sedation. You cannot any amount of sedation could have killed her. So zero sedation, just a little local anesthetic and the right IJ, and then this was snaked down. Not particularly painful, but not comfortable and a lot of pressure, and she was terrified. It was awful. Anyway, so that was placed, okay, and then she came back to the cardiac ICU. So at this point, I was still mostly just consulting on this patient, right? I hadn't taken the patient under on my service in the cardiothoracic or the cardiosurgical ICU on ECMO. So the patient, just to be clear, was still not on ECMO. She had this Impella placed. And so she came back, but obviously I was highly involved because I wanted to know how she was doing, and I was very concerned about her, and everybody was as well. So she came back to the cardiac ICU, now with the Impella. And we kind of all stood, kind of step back and be like, okay, let's see how things shake out. Let's see if this new forward flow through her right ventricle and into her pulmonary artery will help things with the pump, with this small pump. So after like maybe an hour and a half, I went back to my ICU and, think about the patient stuff and looking at her numbers. Clearly things were not getting better, which was a little surprising. You would think providing mechanical support to isolate right heart failure would help that right heart failure. But the lactate was climbing, and the patient was on a lot of inotropy, like I said before, a lot of epinephrine and norepinephrine and dobutamine, and wasn't doing well. Was still not intubated. So then we decided maybe we should put this patient on ECMO because she could arrest at any time and die. And what I didn't want to happen was if she were going to arrest, I would then just put her on ECMO during chest compressions. Like, if we're going to do that, I'd rather put her on ECMO in controlled settings rather than emergently on during chest compressions, right? That's not the ideal way to do it, obviously. So now during this time, and there's a lot of ins and outs of this situation. During this time, so ECMO is a finite, obvious resource, and the ability to put someone on ECMO at any institution. Now, remember, I'm at a large American academic institute. We have lots of resources, and we're a big center. What I'm trying to get at is we were very full. The hospital was very full, but particularly we had a lot of patients already on ECMO, and our unit was very full. So this is very relevant because when this happens, we have to get more stringent. Our criteria about putting patients on ECMO changes. Unfortunately, that is reality. I wish not our criteria, but our selection didn't become more stringent based on restricted resources, if you know what I mean. I wish that were not the case, but that is the reality. And that was very much the reality during the COVID pandemic when we had to be more restrictive and deny deny ECMO to COVID patients that may not have been denied like a week later because we didn't have the space or we didn't have the availability to put them on. And so we have to be more stringent with our criteria. This is a reality. Now, with this patient, so the reason I bring this up is we were in this situation. Now, this patient was a good candidate, right? She was young and, otherwise a very good candidate. Not that being young is just means you're a good candidate. Older people can also be a good candidate for ECMO. But so because of this, we were in a certain status of our institution where when we're trying to decide to put one on ECMO, we need to now assemble a committee, an emergent committee to come together to make sure, do we all agree this patient should go on ECMO? And that was these conditions. That's why I'm bringing all this up. So rather than just me and my colleague, they're like, okay, let's put this patient on ECMO, we had to get other leadership involved as well to talk about, hey, should we put this patient on ECMO? And this was late at night, I think. I don't remember. I think it was late at night. Yeah, it was late at night. So I called other leadership, which I won't get too much in the details. And we all got together and we're like, okay, we'd like to put this patient on ECMO. What do we think? And it had come up that in the patient's chart that there was a history of drug use. Okay. So it was like, not a candidate. If they're on active drug use, illicit drugs, then they can't be put on. And now the reason being, if someone is using, let's say someone's using methamphetamine, and that methamphetamine use has caused a cardiomyopathy, meaning you're in heart failure, and they're currently on it. That person's not going to be a heart transplant candidate, because they need to stop using methamphetamines for a certain amount of time and then be a candidate. So if someone's actively using illicit drugs like that, they're not going to be a candidate. So the committee together was like, I don't think so. Now this committee is not clinically present, so they don't always have the full picture. So anyway, I looked at the patient's chart a little more. I was like, we got to put this patient on ECMO. So I looked at the patient's chart a little more to be like, okay, what is his drug history? And I will say this, that it was very vague. It was alluded to in some notes that the patient had maybe endorsed some marijuana or something in the past. The patient had a drug screen, that admission, and didn't have anything positive on their drug screen. And then I just talked to the patient. I sat down. I said, do you do any drugs? With a translator. And I was like, are you actively doing anything right now? She was like, no, nothing. And I was like, we are putting this patient on ECMO. Like, I don't care about this vague thing that stayed in her chart about how maybe she uses drugs. And then I told that to this committee, and they're like, of course, we defer to you who are at bedside. It's fine. So it wasn't, I hope I'm not making this sound like a big dramatic thing, like, this decision. So we got all of our ducks in a row or whatever, and we all decided, okay, yeah, let's put the patient on ECMO. And the patient was just not doing well, just really, really, really sick. So we we cannulated. Cannulated is a word for putting these large ECMO catheters in. So me and my colleagues started we activated our ECMO process, bringing the machinery, bringing all the instruments that we need, consenting the patient, prepping the patient's groin, because these are going through the patient's groin. Now this is VA ECMO, veno-arterial ECMO, for heart support. And now there's a backup surgeon in our, we always have a backup surgeon, a cardiothoracic surgeon typically, that is always on call when me and my colleagues who are intensivists, when we place patients on ECMO, so that they're aware or if they want to be involved. And so I called my backup surgeon, who I have a good relationship with. He's a good guy. And he came in to help out. And as we were starting to put the patient on, we finally intubated the patient, which was obviously a very difficult intubation. Not a difficult intubation, but a very hemodynamically, patient, we had to do a lot to support the patient's blood pressure through the intubation. And then we put in a transesophageal echo probe. It's a echocardiography transesophageal. It goes down the esophagus to look at the back of the heart. It provides very good views of the heart. So we put that in, and we look at the patient's heart, and it's pumping well. It's beating really well at the left and right side of the heart. Are beating well. They're pumping well. And the surgeon who came in, he saw that, and he's like, why are we putting this patient on ECMO? VA ECMO is not going to do anything. Look at the heart. It's beating, pumping well. You don't put someone on ECMO when their heart's not pumping well. Now, I run into this situation a lot, where it's like, hey, I don't really know what else to do. This patient's dying. It's obviously their heart. Yeah, their heart is pumping well, but what else are we going to do? And my response was, this patient is on astronomical doses of inotropic medication that are helping the heart pump well. If it weren't for all the medications, that heart probably wouldn't be pumping. The patient would be dead. So, and it's like, I don't know what else to do. And I wasn't saying that, and I wasn't, we weren't arguing, but we were, having a collaborative discussion. It's like, what else is there to do? I think this young woman is going to die. So we either do this or we watch her die and then do it then. I don't, you certainly may be right. Maybe it's it may have been pointless to put the patient on ECMO at that point. Maybe it was. I don't know. Nobody knew, right? And that's a big thing about this practice, is nobody really knows. No one has a crystal ball, and you just don't know. So when the risks are so high, and you have a young, otherwise healthy patient that could be a candidate for other therapies that may survive, it's like you should err on just let's just do it if the patient agrees as well. So anyway, we had the discussion. It was like, okay, fine, let's just do it. So we cannulated, put the patient on ECMO, and brought her to the cardiosurgical ICU, the cardiovascular ICU. She continued to not do well. Her lactate continued to climb. The ECMO didn't seem to be making any difference. And as I was leaving with my colleague, we were like, we did the best. Maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, or not the right thing to do. I was like, I don't have any regrets. If the ECMO doesn't do anything, then, we did our best. Anyway, I came in the next day. Patient was totally better. Totally better. 100%. The ECMO absolutely turned the patient around. Lactate completely dropped. It was off all pressors. The patient was supported. The right side of the heart recovered. The patient was off ECMO a few days later. So it was dramatic. And this is a good story to share. The reason I'm sharing it is because and I've only shared with you like a fraction of this occupied hours and hours and hours of time, right? Just this one patient. And the reason I share the story is to give a window into decision making that goes into such complicated medical care and medical surgical care and mechanical circulatory support that, and in this particular niche of medicine, it's such a data-free zone. There's not a lot of good, robust data to base our decisions on, and you just have to go with, this is what I said, I think earlier before, there's no template. You just got to go with what's going on in that situation. You have to tailor make it. And you have to have a collaborative decision making. Everybody should be on the same page. There's going to be debates. There's going to be people that are dogmatic. There's going to be people that are like, it must be this, it must be that, we should do that. It's like, yeah, maybe you're right, but you don't know that you're right. Nobody knows if you're right. So I don't know what the right answer is in every situation. And I've had so many situations like this, so many conversations like this. This is one of just so many conversations that I have with patients and their families and other healthcare providers and multidisciplinary teams trying to make the right decision. And everybody wants to do what's right, right? There's no villains. There can be. There can be very toxic, malignant individuals that they're getting in the way of things because of their ego and stuff. I don't think I work with anybody like that, in case you're wondering. I think I happen to work at a very good institution with really, really amazing people. Truly, and I'm not just saying that. I sincerely mean that. But that's just wow, that's one small story. It took about 30 minutes. But, yeah, I hope that kind of just gives you a little window into just how hard it is to make these decisions. And I'll tell you this, that I've made this decision, we could have made this decision, right? And maybe we would have killed the patient by putting them on ECMO, because ECMO's not benign, right? We could have put this, in another universe, another parallel universe, we put that patient, this young woman on ECMO, and we caused massive clotting, and, she clotted all through the cannulas and all up her leg and into her heart and died, right? That didn't happen. Just to be clear, that did not happen. But I'm just saying that could have happened. That could have been a possibility. And putting on her ECMO actually could have killed her. Not likely, but that has happened. So you just don't know. And you just do your best. And you do your best, and sometimes things don't work out. And that is the nature of medicine. That's just the nature of reality. It's something you must accept if you're going to be in medicine, that despite your best efforts, things don't go well, and you got to move on. That's just all there is to it. All right, I think that's all the kind of medical content I have for today. I'm just going to get on to talking about a book that I really enjoyed. You may have heard of it. It's called, this is nonfiction. I'll do a fiction after this. It's called Nixonland, The Rise of a President and the Fracturing of America. And it's by Rick Perlstein. So Nixonland is not a biography necessarily of Richard Nixon. It's a historical account of the cultural and political shifts and subsequent turmoil that happened in America in the 1960s. This book is very long, but it's very engaging. I was never bored. It's really informative about why America is the way it is right now. In this, it's an historical account. You get a really granular view of the politics, the politicians, the politicking, and the dumpster fire of culture wars and civil unrest that occurred during that time. And yes, you'll also learn a ton about Richard Nixon. You'll learn that he was a tenacious and, frankly, an extremely brilliant politician. Totally unscrupulous. He was I mean that as an insult, that he was a brilliant politician. That's an insult. So anyway, the book starts with a little bit about Nixon's humble upbringing, which it truly was. He grew up in California, and it's about his like tumultuous journey from an absolute political loser to the president of the most powerful country in the history of ever. His rise to political fame is truly something remarkable, and I don't think I totally appreciate it until I read this. And it's certain that Nixon himself accomplished most of it by his own grit and perseverance. I do believe that. And again, it's not to say he's a good guy. He was not a good guy. He was a war criminal, in my opinion, and he was a right-wing demagogue who stoked racist, nativist, and white grievances to break the political climate in half and then to seize power from the pieces. That's what he did. Nixon first became a House representative by learning how to make people feel like they were victims. He really became a famous political figure during his prosecution of Alger Hiss, who he forced into self-perjury during, Soviet red baiting questioning that landed that guy in prison. Continuing to stoke communism panic, he created the Orthogonian movement. And then he moved on to becoming the Senator of California. And then he had his sights on being the vice president to Eisenhower to get the nod. During his vice president bid, which was different than vice president selection now. Now it's just, someone gets picked. Back then it was quite different. During his bid to be VP, he came under fire for allegedly improperly using campaign funds. And so he rolled out his famous checkers speech, where he appealed to Americans' emotions with his dog Checkers at his feet. Right, it was very PR move, and apparently that was a pretty groundbreaking thing that he did at the time. And it's the crazy thing that is it totally worked, and he became Eisenhower's VP. After being VP, he took a shot at being governor of California, which was a total disaster for him. And so, after his failed bid, he became, at becoming governor, he became a political laughingstock, and the entire world everybody thought his political career was over. And then he receded a little bit to the background, and he campaigned for Barry Goldwater and laid lots of groundwork while understanding that tapping into America's fears and resentment was a pathway to political power. So you step away from Nixon for a moment, and let's talk about the American cultural landscape of the 1960s. So you have Lyndon B. Johnson and his Great Society policies. You have civil rights movements, Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act movements that are happening there. LBJ was also a tremendously successful politician, somehow bringing together enough liberal consensus without pissing off conservatives too much. He was unbelievably successful and popular. In fact, it really seems like LBJ was the last president at the end of the great consensus where partisanship and, party affiliation weren't so polarized. You have FDR and Truman, Eisenhower, JFK, and LBJ had the benefit of political and public consensus, where the right-wingers like John Birch Societies and William F. Buckley's and George Wallace's and Barry Goldwater's, they were all too fringe to have mainstream influence. Before Nixon. I'm talking about before Nixon. So here's the question. How did LBJ go from the Great Society superstar to literally backing out of his own incumbent presidential race because he became such a political loser in 1968? That's crazy. That is really, really crazy that happened. That the incumbent president who was prior so successful he had such taint to him that he didn't run again. The answer is Nixonland. And that's what the book is really about. Nixonland is what was happening here. America broke apart late during LBJ's elected term. Richard Nixon had failed before that great breaking because America wasn't ready for him. But then, in 1968, he fit into place perfectly. And he knew it. That is why he was such a brilliant politician. He understood it. He really did. So think about all the cultural wars happening right now in 2024. You have abortion and gun control, affirmative action, U.S. foreign war entanglements, police brutality, sexual freedom, poverty, drug wars. All of this was born out of the 1960s with MLK and the SNCC and Black Panthers, hippies, LSD movements, white riots, anti-Vietnam movements. You have Jane Fonda, celebrity, anti-Vietnam. The long, hot American summer with protests and police brutality and crackdown was nuts. It was crazy. There was the Kent State Massacre, was literally right out of a fascist country. Just killing students. All of this broke out in the 1960s, and Nixon picked up the pieces. The Republican Party fundamentally shifted and became much more conservative. There was a huge red wave for the first time in 20 years. And then Nixon got into power, and he kept on being Richard Nixon. He kept on doing what he got really good at doing, which was seeming to understand perfectly how to gain the public's favor, dance the line between dove and hawk with Vietnam, and also incredulously make inroads with communist China, which was applauded at home. This is the same guy who red-baited Alger Hiss and got him sent to prison, now rubbing elbows, literally, with Mao. And then Nixon literally and unilaterally upended the Bretton Woods economic arrangement, ensuring dollar-to-gold bullion, convertibility. Overnight, Nixon turned the dollar into a speculative currency. He completely broke the agreement with the rest of the world. The crazy thing is, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, that a lot of this stuff actually kind of worked in the long run for the U.S., especially with China relationship and creating the dollar fiat currency. I'm not saying it was good for everybody. I'm just saying these things kind of worked out for the U.S. Nixon predicted and sowed the seeds for a new type of American hegemony by making the dollar the reserve currency for the world and creating a trade deficit that surplus countries became dependent on to keep their economies going, like China and Japan and Germany. So the story of Nixonland is the same American story today. America cannot escape the similar political and cultural conditions that set the 1960s on fire. Now, the political violence and the state violence and the war crimes in Vietnam and Cambodia, they may have been arguably worse than in the recent 2010s and 2020s. Maybe they were worse. Maybe they weren't than right now. But something is indeed, in my opinion, way, way worse right now. Let's go back to the Chequers speech of Richard Nixon. Nixon had to meticulously craft a public image and engage in high-level subterfuge and politicking to maintain his political power until there was bipartisan consensus that had enough of his crimes, and forced him to resign, right? He was forced out. That kind of politics is quaint now. Today, Donald Trump is a highly deranged version of Richard Nixon. He uses the same dog whistles to muster, right-wing grievances and white grievances and political power, but with zero of the nuanced respectability and bipartisan rule of law to threaten him. In the 2020s, we now have a bastardized version of Richard Nixon, who has consolidated his power over the entire GOP. The vulgarity and the corruption and the lies are now plain for all to see. That is next level stuff. And that's no longer Nixonland. That is Trumpland. So very good book, Nixonland, by Rick Perlstein. I highly recommend you read it. All right, I'm going to just briefly talk about a fiction book that I read recently. I read so many. I read lots of fiction, lots of nonfiction. This is called The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin, who I'm a big fan of. I think she's one of the best sci-fi fantasy writers ever. Absolutely prolific writer. If you haven't read anything by her, you definitely should. Excuse me. This is probably The Lathe of Heaven is probably my fifth or sixth Le Guin book, and she's a master. It's not just her prose, which is simple and beautiful. It's the premise, the worlds, the characters, the relationships, and the masterful commentary about not only our society, but often what it is to even be a human being. Some mild spoilers about the plot. It's not going to lessen your enjoyment of the book if you want to read it. So this is a book about a man named George Orr whose dreams change reality upon his awakening. He has a dream, he wakes up, and he's altered reality with his dream. Involuntarily, he doesn't want to do it. It causes extreme distress to George, who takes drugs to suppress his dreaming, which is illegal in this kind of in the society, in the fictional society. And it lands him in front of a psychiatrist, like a state designated psychiatrist named Haber, to rehabilitate him for taking these drugs. Haber figures out that Orr is not crazy, but does in fact change reality with his dreams. And so Haber, considering himself a force for good to remove all the social ailments from the world, uses a machine to control Orr's dreams and to make a new society in his image. The results are, of course, like making wishes to the monkey paw, as it doesn't quite turn out the way Haber would like. He asks for world peace in one of the dreams, and he gets aliens who attack, which causes humanity to unite in peace, and so forth. There's lots of that. What we get in the end is a dystopic authoritarian society where race and disease don't exist anymore, but with that, the loss of humanity, and even entire people, like a black woman in the story, and who's a love interest named Heather Lalache. There's just no longer black people anymore as this man tries to improve society and everything becomes homogenized. Here's a quote from the book. He had grown up in a country run by politicians who sent the pilots to man the bombers to kill the babies to make the world safe for children to grow up in. And the derangement and cycles of reality that happen in this book give a surreal quality that is not unlike reality. It's incredible that this book was written in the 70s. The language and characters and story don't seem outdated to me. The ethos of and the issues with Haber, the psychiatrist, are ultimately fascist ideas, and they can be summed up in a quote from him. Here it is. This is the guy who's trying to make the world better. He says, "We need health. We simply have no room for the incurables, the gene damaged, who degrade the species. We have not time for wasted, useless suffering." I find it interesting that Le Guin used the names George Orr and Haber. I'm almost positive she meant George Orr as a reference to George Orwell, who is also mentioned in the book, and his ability to create worlds and then try to navigate them. And I believe Le Guin intentionally is evoking the Nazi scientist Fritz Haber, the man who developed the Haber process, which created chemical warfare, but also helped to create nitrogen, to free nitrogen from the air to prevent likely billions from starving by creating fertilizer. The paradox of Haber's intentions and impacts are clear in the book. I love this. I'll just leave you with this final quote from the book. "Love doesn't just sit there like stone. It has to be made, like bread, remade all the time, made new." Beautiful book, amazing writer. If you haven't read Ursula K. Le Guin, I recommend you start with The Left Hand of Darkness. She's the one who wrote, the Earth-Sea cycle. She's amazing. She's stunning. She's incredible. Amazing writer. I highly recommend her. All right, everyone. I think that's it for me. Thanks for listening again. I'll try to be a little more frequent coming up soon with, kind of get a string of episodes out. Please, one of the reasons I sometimes don't do episodes is I don't have anything to say. So if you want me to say something, email me. And I know people do email me, and I can't always respond. But if you have an interesting topic that you think I would have something meaningful to say about, email me at icudoctorecmo, icudoctorecmo@gmail.com. And then I'm on TikTok, icudoctor is the handle, and then Instagram, icudoctor, TikTok. You can check that out as well. Please leave a review in the whatever podcast thing you're listening on. That's what helps the podcast grow. I do this as a public service. I don't make any money off of anything, any social media or any podcast I do. I never intend on changing that, and I enjoy it. And share the podcast, and that's it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.